Marshall Peak, Chapter 12, The Trick. Bang, 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 bang. The sound of the beating rang out. Even though the businesses on this street were run by ordinary people, they currently displayed a powerful fighting spirit that left others flabbergasted. More or less, these merchants did anything for money and were generally detested by others. And now, when they were given a chance to release their stress, how could they be lenient? This was especially true for his rice stand's waiter. With rag bags in his hands, he relentlessly beat down the men. Furthermore, with so many people hitting these men, they couldn't identify who was hitting them. So these people didn't have to worry about the consequences. There is strength in numbers. Xianxia only asked for aid, but these merchants pushed him aside before he could lift a finger. After a while, the beating gradually stopped, and you could see the two men curled on the ground, bruised all over. The rag bag had also disappeared. Looking at the men, Sumo's heart cried out in pain, and his leg cramped. The men were beaten bloody, and their faces so swollen that even their mothers won't recognize them. This situation only occurred because the men didn't have enough strength to protect themselves. Although they had swords, one could see that it was only for decoration. If they could use them, would they suffer these attacks? On the other hand, how could experts stoop so low as to perform such despicable acts? Now, even though the beating was finished, the merchants remained. With their horrendous faces and hearts full of fear, the two Han men weakly called, "Su," their hands trembling. Unfortunately, Su Mu's expression changed, and he loudly exclaimed, "What, Su, you want this young master to give you pasty bones?" Seeing this, Xianxia smiled and proclaimed, "You two scumbags! I don't know how many others you have framed, but it's extremely hateful. His words are an exaggeration, but this seemed like the truth for the merchants present." That waiter who previously held the rag bag spat. You trash! You actually dared to act arrogantly at this rice stand." The waiter continued expressing his frustrations, but didn't expect Xianxia to expand on his statement. "Correct. These types of people should really die. Fellow disciple, why don't you and I each kill one? That will teach them to break the law again and be for the greater good." Hearing this remark, the two people on the floor broke out in cold sweat and were terrified. They had never expected this frail boy to be so ruthless. Sumo just stared at him, trying to figure out whether or not he was joking. But Xianxia's face held no sign that it was a joke. To tell the truth, although what the men did was cowardly, it wasn't serious enough to die for. Undoubtedly, Xianxia's punishment was a little too cruel. Sumo could only ask, "Brother, isn't that a bit excessive?" "Right. Excessive?" Xianxia shook his head. "If their little lie were to succeed today, Boss, his life would have been ruined. How would he maintain a livelihood? This is pushing people to the limits, so how is this excessive? You know, every action they do will have a consequence for every person." Previously, when that merchant heard Xianxia's words, they had also thought this. But hearing his reasoning, they understood the sense behind his words and were conflicted. But the final decision wasn't up to them, so they just stood on the sidelines. But when Boss he wanted to say something, he was stopped by a look from Xianxia. "This may certainly be the case, but we can't just casually go killing people." Now, Sumo was really worried. He didn't think that this disciple in front of him was so ruthless and merciless. Initially, he had planned it out quite well. Firstly, those two men would slander Boss He, and then he would go and stop them, saving Boss He. Then they would escape, and he would receive gratitude from the boss, thus accomplishing his goal. But he hadn't thought such a vicious disciple would appear so easily choosing to kill them. This could have been better. Sumo saw the two men pleading with him to save them. Within those gazes were signs of threats. How could Sumo not understand their meaning? It was like being tied to the body of a grasshopper. If we are to suffer a tragic end, then you would not come out unharmed. That was their meaning. At that moment, Xianxia said, "Brother, There is no other method. Through my experiences, killing is a natural thing. Could it be that you haven't killed before? Or you guys already know each other? So, you are unwilling to kill? This statement made Sumu's heart jump to his throat. Turning around to look at Yang Kai, he found a mischievous smile. "Brother, what do you mean?" With a calm face, he questioned while thinking whether or not Yang Kai saw through him. He hadn't revealed any clues, so how could he know? He didn't know that Yang Kai knew of his plan purely by coincidence. If not, he would have also been fooled. Boss, he was also smart. He understood the hidden meaning in Yang Kai's words and asked Sumu, "Little brother, what tune are you singing?" Yang Kai had revealed a portion of Sumu's true colors. How could boss he not be able to see? Yang Kai just shook his head. He didn't point out anything in particular, but just stared at Sumu. "Brother, I think you are a courageous person, but you are hesitating. Don't worry. I am here to accompany you and the villagers. So what are you afraid of?" "What am I afraid of?" Sumu laughed out loud as if reassuring himself. He said, "What am I afraid of? Isn't it just killing a person? Who hasn't killed before?" He was unwilling to admit he hadn't killed before in front of Yang Kai. In the end, this person's disposition shocked him. Sumu hadn't stepped down from the challenge. Sumu then directed a cold, ruthless intent toward the men lying on the ground. Looking into that young man's eyes, those two men knew they were finished. This round, they were used too thoroughly. "Brother, let's do it!" Yang Kai continued to pour oil on the flame. Breathing deeply, Sumu slowly nodded. Seeing this happen, the two men immediately knew their end was nigh. So, how could they endure without doing anything? Jumping up, they pointed toward Sumu and proclaimed, "Sumu, you treacherous bastard! You asked us, brothers, for a favor, to slander Bossy Standing so that you could come to the rescue and become a hero. But how do you repay us? Not only are we beaten like pigs, but now we must die for our crimes. You really are trash. You lie." Hearing his scheme revealed, Sumu was furious. As if their injuries didn't affect them, the men just sneered, and the larger man shouted, informing all, "Everybody, young or old, today, my brother and I came out and caused trouble for you." But this was all at the command of Sumu. He had taken fancy to Bossy's daughter, but sadly she rejected him. So he hatched a plan to obtain her.